you get to be my age, certain things become clearer than ever. I know the American story. Again and again, I've seen the contest between competing forces in the battle for the soul of our nation, between those who want to pull America back to the past and those who want to move America into the future. My lifetime has taught me to embrace freedom and democracy, a future based on core values that have defined America: honesty, decency, dignity, equality, to respect everyone, to give everyone a fair shot, to give hate no safe harbor. Now, other people my age see it differently. The American story of resentment, revenge, and retribution, that's not me. In my career, I've been told I was too young. By the way, they didn't let me on the Senate elevators for votes sometimes. They're not a joke. And I've been told I'm too old. Whether young or old, I've always known what endures. I've known our North Star. The very idea of America is that we're all created equal and deserves to be treated equally throughout our lives. We've never fully lived up to that idea, but we've never walked away from it either. And I won't walk away from it now. I'm optimistic. I really am. I'm optimistic, Nancy. My fellow Americans, the issue facing our nation isn't how old we are. It's how old are our ideas. Hate, anger, revenge, retribution are the oldest of ideas. But you can't lead America with ancient ideas that only take us back. You lead America, the land of possibilities. You need a vision for the future and what can and should be done. Tonight you've heard mine. I see a future where defending democracy, you don't diminish it. I see a future where we restore the right to choose and protect our freedoms, not take them away. I see a future where the middle class finally has a fair shot and the wealthy have to pay their fair share in taxes. I see a future where we save the planet from the climate crisis and our country from gun violence. Above all, I see a future for all Americans. I see a country for all Americans. And I will always be president for all Americans because I believe in America. I believe in you, the American people. You're the reason we've never been more optimistic about our future than I am now. So let's build the future together. Let's remember who we are. We are the United States of America. And there is nothing beyond our capacity when we act together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
President Biden closing the State of the Union address last night. Speaking for just over an hour, the president made his case for a second term, leaning into some of the themes that will play prominently as we head into November, like abortion rights and immigration. Biden also hammered away at Donald Trump and his Republican critics over a number of policies, calling them out, offering a sharp contrast between his administration's accomplishments and those of his predecessor. Welcome to Morning Joe. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have the host of Way Too Early, White House Bureau Chief at Politico, Jonathan Lemire, former White House Director of Communications to President Obama, Jennifer Palmieri, President of the National Action Network and host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, Reverend Al Sharpton, President Emeritus of the Council of Foreign Relations, Richard Haass, and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and Associate Editor of the Washington Post, Eugene Robinson, is with us. Also with us this morning, author and NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. And Joe, I will tell you, I'm at the Forbes Know Your Value 3050 Summit here in Abu Dhabi on this International Women's Day. Last night, President Biden spoke a lot about women's issues impacted by the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And we're going to get to all of that in just a moment. But I'm telling you, Joe Biden proved, I think, he still has a pulse. That's number one. And Speaker Mike Johnson might have rolled his eyes more than both my daughters in their entire lives. What's your take?
Well, I mean, had a pulse. He had Frazier's left hook. I mean, I have never seen, and part of this is delivery, part of it is speech writing, part of it is setting up the argument for the fall. I've sat through a lot of these, and I have never seen one side put in so many uncomfortable positions as the Republicans were last night, because they were on the wrong side of history, they were on the wrong side of the polls, they were on the wrong side of politics, they were on the wrong side of decency. This was a tour de force by Joe Biden, and you had Peggy Noonan last week calling him cranky old Joe after his angry press conference, who last night, Michael Beschloss, likened him to Harry Truman. And there was a real give 'em hell Harry part of this. But what really completed it was give 'em hell Harry meets Ronald Reagan's A City Shining Brightly on the Hill for all the world to see. When he says, you know, he's been around a long time. He's been called too young. He's been called too old. But listen to this. But I know what endures. I can see our North Star, that we are all created equal, and we have never reached that goal. But that doesn't mean we don't give up trying. And I thought it was a brilliant turn on Donald Trump when he said, you know, it's not about how old you are. It's about how old your ideas are. And time again, I go back. There were just so many beautiful lines here, again, delivered beautifully. He said, my lifetime has taught me to embrace freedom and democracy, to give hate no safe harbor. Now, some other people my age, they see a different story, an American story of resentment, revenge, and retribution. That's not me. And in the words of Naomi Biden, doubt him, then watch him. He's been defeating the odds his entire life. This has been a recurring theme, Michael, for us, where Joe Biden's underestimated before Iowa. He's underestimated before and after New Hampshire. He's been told he's too old since 2000. He just keeps surprising people. He just keeps winning. He just keeps outperforming. I have no doubt that every Republican in that chamber was shocked by what they saw last night, because he did it to them again. As Newt Gingrich said, at some point we'll figure this out. He said this after the 22 election. Democrats always underestimated Ike. They always underestimated Reagan. Now it's us. We always underestimate Biden. And as Newt Gingrich said, at some point we'll figure this out. He said this after the 22 election. Democrats always underestimated Ike. They always underestimated Reagan. Now it's us. We always underestimate Biden.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. And who does that remind you and me of? And that is Harry Truman in 1948. You know, the beginning of that year down to the summer, even Democrats were saying, Truman is a loser. We better find someone else to run for us. Is there any way we can get rid of this candidate who was in his mid-60s, which was considered very old at that time? And so Truman had a new voice when he came to the convention that summer, got up and said, I and my running mate, Alvin Barkley, are going to win this election and make those Republicans like it. And not only in that speech, but all through that fall, it was suddenly not the sort of meek and polite Truman of the first several years, it was give him hell, Harry. And he was saying, you know, Democrats have given, you know, help the farmers, and we've given people support with rent. And we've also fought for NATO. That was the year that Harry Truman signed the NATO treaty that in 2024 could not be more important than it has ever been.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And Willie Geist, he talked about NATO. He talked about Sweden. He talked about all the important parts of his agenda moving forward. And time and again, it seems that he put the Speaker of the House behind him in an uncomfortable position. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard not to cheer for freedom. Kind of hard not to cheer when somebody says we're going to stand up to Russian aggression. Kind of hard. IVF, you name it. Time and time again, Republicans were put in this terrible position of having to sit down on issues that the overwhelming majority of Americans supported. And when they shouted at Biden, he gave better than he got. I mean, he went after him time and again, at one point going, hey, come on, wait a second. Read the bill. I know you know how to read, right?
Yeah, he could not have asked for a better foil in that room last night. I mean, the things he was looking for applause on and got them on one side and not the other were things like Putin is bad. We should be helping Ukraine. Democracy is good. What happened on January 6th was bad. That we need to fix immigration, and there's a bill sitting in the Senate that will fix the immigration problem, or at least help to fix it. They wouldn't clap for that, even as the cutaway to James Lankford, of course, the Republican who co-authored that bill in the Senate, nodding along to President Biden and mouthing the words, that's right, as the President of the United States talked about what the bill would do. I think bigger picture, though, Joe, as we know when we talk about on this show, Democrats, supporters even of Joe Biden, have had the live question going into this campaign, is he up to it? Is Joe Biden up to it? And he answered that resoundingly last night with his performance. And I think the texts I was getting at the beginning of the speech were phew, like he's going to be okay, ending with wow. I think he far exceeded expectations for people who were a little worried, frankly, about what was going to happen in that room. But you're right, he had the perfect opponent for him in that boxing match. You had people screaming like children while wearing MAGA hats. You had one guy screaming from the back while wearing Donald Trump's mugshot and Never Surrender T-shirt under his suit jacket in the well there. So Joe Biden and his team are very happy with what happened last night. And he did contrast his administration's actions with the words and actions of Donald Trump. Never called him Donald Trump, always said my predecessor. But in that way, it did have the feel of a campaign speech.
My predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, do whatever the hell you want. That's a quote. A former president actually said that, bowing down to a Russian leader. I think it's outrageous, it's dangerous, and it's unacceptable. My predecessor and some of you here seek to bury the truth about January 6th. I will not do that. This is the moment to speak the truth and to bury the lies. Here's the simple truth. You can't love your country only when you win. My predecessor came to office determined to see Roe v. Wade overturned. He's the reason it was overturned, and he brags about it. Look at the chaos that has resulted. My predecessor failed the most basic presidential duty that he owes to American people, the duty to care. I think that's unforgivable. Past administrations, including my predecessor, including some Democrats as well in the past, failed to buy American. Not anymore. But my predecessor, and many in this chamber, want to take this prescription drug away by repealing the Affordable Care Act. I'm not going to let that happen. The last administration enacted a $2 trillion tax cut, overwhelmingly benefit the top 1%, the very wealthy and the biggest corporations, and exploded the federal deficit. In November, my team began serious negotiation with a bipartisan group of senators. The result was a bipartisan bill with the toughest set of border security reforms we've ever seen. Oh, you don't think so? Well, my predecessor called members of Congress and the Senate to demand they block the bill. He feels political win. He viewed it as a will be a political win for me and a political loser for him. Predecessor is watching. Instead of paying politics and pressuring members of Congress to block the bill, join me in telling the Congress to pass it. But unlike my predecessor, I know who we are as Americans. My predecessor told the NRA he's proud he did nothing on guns when he was president. I've made sure that the most advanced American technologies can't be used in China, not allowing to trade them there. Frankly, for all this tough talk on China, it never occurred to my predecessor to do any of that.
Joe, you did get the sense that Speaker Johnson wished they could push into just a two-shot at certain times of the president and vice president so he didn't have to react. But obviously he's shaking his head there for Donald Trump, who's watching at home, to tell the boss that he's got his back. But I mean this as a serious, not a rhetorical question. When the president talks about the bipartisan immigration reform bill led by James Lankford, and they start booing it and shaking their head, what are they booing and shaking their head about? What is Speaker Johnson shaking his head about? He knows exactly what happened, which is he called for immigration reform, got it from the Senate, and now won't take it up. He's in a box, like you said.
In a box. And why is he shaking his head when Joe Biden talks about January 6th being such a dark day? When he talks about the big lie, which Speaker Johnson was, again, one of the key proponents of on the House floor. Liz Cheney wrote all about it. And how do you not exactly stand up when the President of the United States says, you want to buy American? You shake your hand at that? Buying America? Ooh la la, what a campaign this is going to be. Jonathan Lemire, I've got to say, again, we just need to keep going back to it. Joe Biden underestimated time and time again. We were having the same conversation after the State of the Union last year. People going, oh, well, maybe it's not too old. Maybe not. Same now. It'll be the same going into this fall. I mean, Democrats certainly, if there were any Democrats wavering, any Democrats concerned, last night certainly had to make them feel like they're in really good shape, especially, I just love how the issues line up. Republicans are on the wrong side of history. They're on the wrong side of the polls. They're on the wrong side of decency on so many of these questions. I'm saying specifically on that front, Donald Trump. I mean, last night, game, set, match to Joe Biden. Last night, the 9 o'clock hour and then the 10 o'clock hour set fundraising records for a campaign that has already set fundraising records for the most money ever raised. And I think, Mika, people just at home, not just Democrats, but I'm sure Republicans, moderate Republicans, swing voters, independents, had to really, really like what they heard when Donald Trump once again had the contrast time and again, somebody that was against freedom abroad, somebody that was against freedom at home. And that's when Joe Biden really brought it home. He talked about freedom abroad, but then he talked about freedom at home and women's freedom and said back to the Supreme Court, oh, yeah, you say women, they have the right to express themselves politically? Well, stand back because they're just about to do that.
That was an incredible moment, especially with the members of the Supreme Court right there. Last night, President Biden took that issue, as Joe said, reproductive rights, head on. He called for a guaranteed right to IVF nationwide and slammed the Supreme Court for overturning Roe v. Wade right to their faces. Take a look.
History is watching another assault on freedom. Joining us tonight is Latoya Beasley, a social worker from Birmingham, Alabama. 14 months ago, she and her husband welcomed a baby girl thanks to the miracle of IVF. She scheduled treatments to have that second child, but the Alabama Supreme Court shut down IVF treatments across the state, unleashed by a Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. She was told her dream would have to wait. What her family had got through should never have happened. Unless Congress acts, it could happen again. So tonight, let's stand up for families like hers. To my friends across the aisle, don't keep this waiting any longer. Guarantee the right to IVF. Guarantee it nationwide. My predecessor came to office determined to see Roe v. Wade overturned. He's the reason it was overturned, and he brags about it. Look at the chaos that has resulted. Many of you in this chamber and my predecessor are promising to pass a national ban on reproductive freedom. My God, what freedom else would you take away? Look, it's a decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court majority wrote the following, and with all due respect, justices, women are not without electoral power. Electoral or political power. You're about to realize just how much you're right about that. Those bragging about overturning Roe v. Wade have no clue about the power of women. But they found out when reproductive freedom was on the ballot. We won in 2022 and 2020, and we'll win again in 2024.
What an incredible moment addressing the Supreme Court justices right there. Hold that thought for a second and think about everything you just heard for just a moment from President Biden last night and compare it now to this.
For 54 years, they were trying to get Roe v. Wade terminated, and I did it, and I'm proud to have done it. President Trump is going to make a determination what he thinks is great for the country and what's fair for the country. But the fact that I was able to terminate Roe v. Wade after 50 years of trying, they worked for 50 years. I've never seen anything like it. They worked, and I was so honored to have done it. Well, I did something that nobody thought was possible. I got rid of Roe v. Wade. And by doing that, it put pro-lifers in a very strong negotiating position. Nobody did a job like I did, including Roe v. Wade, bringing it back to the states. What I did by killing Roe v. Wade, which everyone said was impossible.
Wow. Jem Palmieri, President Trump is very proud of that accomplishment of basically creating a women's health care emergency in the United States. Literally life and death health situations for women. Talk about being the party of life. They're the party of letting women die slowly or watch their babies die slowly. And that's who they are now. And President Biden took the bull by the horns last night, and he addressed it head on. He addressed the Supreme Court head on. Unusual, but these are unusual times, aren't they?
Yeah, and you just know how, I mean, it's so prominent. Women's minds, men's minds in America. It was the very first excerpt they put out was the excerpt about him addressing the Supreme Court when they put that out in the afternoon. They wanted us to know that was going to be a focus from the guests that the First Lady had in her box, someone who had been affected by IVF, other people that had to go out of state to get abortion health care. And, it was just, it is, as the vice president says so well, they're trying to tell you, they're telling you that you can't decide when to end a pregnancy or when to start a family. When Jonathan talked about how they made campaign raised a lot of money in the 9 p.m. hour, that is certainly what we heard at the top of the 9 p.m. hour. And I also have to wonder how much money was raised in the Republican response, because, in terms of how women are going to feel about how that went over, I feel like that's going to be something that's going to be motivating to a lot of women as well.
And joining us this morning is Speaker Emerita and Democratic Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi of California. Madam Speaker, it's always good to have you on the show. I'm curious, could the president have drawn a starker contrast last night in his speech between him and his predecessor? He mentioned his predecessor many times, and you really could see the elephant in the room, if you know what I mean, and the elephant, of course, being Donald Trump. What did you make of the Republican response to everything that the president had to say? And if you didn't have a chance to actually watch the Republican response, I'm even talking about the Republican response in the room.
Well, good morning, Mika, and it's wonderful to be with you on International Women's Day, and I congratulate you and thank you for your leadership. And now you're globally doing all of this. And I think the president, in his remarks last night, was honoring women in a very significant way in terms of policy. What really, frankly, we were watching last night was the president, his command of the issues, his forcefulness in how he presented it all. Whatever the decision was on the part of the Republicans to respond or not was their decision. But what we were concerned about was how the American people responded to President Biden last night, and they did in a very positive way. The response when the president came in, we were so excited to see him. His welcome was overwhelming. What was more important is after he spoke, it was even more overwhelming. And what we saw is what we will continue to see. A message is only as important as it's repeated and reinforced, not only by the principal, but by the members of Congress as well throughout the country. So it was a triumphant evening, regardless of the Republican response.
Well, the Democrats in the room were certainly charged up and boldly and loudly supporting the president. What does the Democratic Party need to do moving forward after a great night like last night?
Yeah, I think it's really important, thank you for asking, to have reinforcement of the message. As the president indicated very clearly, the State of the Union was solid. That is to say, the jobs are up to the tune of, what did he say, 15 million, and still counting. Wages are up. Unemployment is down. Inflation is down. But we still have to do more. So I think what is important about the message is we're proud of what has been done. But elections are about the future. And he talked about what needs to be done next. And that's the message we must reinforce. Some of what comes next springs from what we have done in terms of the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS bill and the rescue package and the PACT Act and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, in terms of saving the planet and reducing the cost of prescription drugs. But more needs to be done. So I think the message of where we go from here, the president was very clear in the distinction he made as to they want to take us backward in terms of even our personal liberties. We want to go forward in terms of opportunity for all Americans, especially the middle class and those who aspire to it.
I want to ask you about Speaker Mike Johnson. You have daughters. I have daughters. I saw a lot of familiar eye-rolling happening last night during the president's speech. He was eye-rolling a lot. But I'm curious, working alongside now as a member of Congress, seeing him as Speaker, a position that you held twice, making history. Yeah. Do you think there's room for compromise on foreign aid or any of these pressing issues?
Well, I certainly hope so. We are moving forward to keep government open, and that is a compromise. And there has to be a recognition that we have a Democratic president, we have a Democratic Senate, and we have a Republican House. So there has to be a negotiation and there has to be compromise. And so far, well, yesterday we passed legislation. I mean, this week we passed legislation to keep some of the government open, and now we'll go forward with that. And I'm optimistic about that. But what really is necessary right now is for us to have the support to go to Ukraine, to have the humanitarian assistance go to Gaza, to have the package, the security package that the president had that addresses the security, keeping our borders secure, as well as keeping our democracy secure. And that is really what has to happen next. And I'm optimistic that there's enough support on the Republican side to get that done. And we have to do it in a timely fashion. So by the time we leave here for Passover and Easter, we can rejoice in the Easter, the glorious feast that is my favorite. Rejoice that we have helped people throughout the world to protect democracy, to protect ourselves at home, and to protect and honor our commitment to the people of Ukraine.
Madam Speaker, the cameras caught you last night speaking to Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Please, if you will, share that conversation if you'd like. But setting that aside, we also want to get your take as to McConnell, who has been so sharply critical of Donald Trump in the past, but yet this week endorsed him anyway.
Well, again, my conversation with Leader McConnell was personal in terms of extending my sympathy on the loss of a family member. So sad. And I know Elaine, and I've met many of her sisters, and I know how close they all are. And it's quite a sad situation. In terms of Mitch, politically, now we're talking, he and I have had parallel time, 20 years. I was Speaker or leader, and approximately the same time he's been leader on their side. But before that, we were both the top, I was the top Democrat, he was the top Republican in his body on the foreign ops. And so on foreign cooperation, all of that, we worked together. Sometimes we agreed, sometimes we didn't. But you see how strong he has been on Ukraine, knows what. The sad part of it is that Mitch McConnell knows full well that the president was guilty of a crime on January 6th. He knew that what was happening was wrong in terms of this beautiful Capitol being assaulted, but not just the physical building. What happens here, our Constitution, our ability to honor our oath of office, to have a peaceful transfer of power. He even spoke to that eloquently on the floor, but then he wouldn't allow a bipartisan commission to be formed. Do me a personal favor. Don't vote for something to investigate this. We had our own January 6th. We were not going to let this go unanswered. And so for him to know how bad the president's predecessor was on all of this, and then come to the conclusion that he would endorse him when we thought he was going to convict him. The word was he was close to conviction, and now he's endorsing. It's really very, very sad. And it's a sad conclusion to a career of strategic. I mean, again, mostly we didn't agree, but I was respectful of the view that he brought forth and how we could work together. It's really a person, in my view, a sad professional tragedy that he had to come around. Why would he do such a thing? Perhaps he'll explain it to the world. But in the meantime, we have an election coming up. We have a great president. He made a forceful, he showed command of the issues in a way that his predecessor wouldn't have the faintest idea to do. We're legislators working with a president to sign a bill, but also to inspire a vision. And the contrast could not be greater. The other side has no knowledge. The only thing they know how to do is give tax breaks to the wealthiest people in our country. 83% of the benefits going to the top 1%. As the president said last night, $2 trillion to the national debt. And what is one of the arguments that we have to keep government open? Are we going to feed the children? Oh, do we have enough money to feed the children? For WIC, for women, infant children. So the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans could not be clearer. The fact that we need to work together is essential. That's what we owe the American people. But the vision that the president put forth, the knowledge that he demonstrated on it, the judgment that he brings with it, the empathy that is in his heart for America's working families, it was just remarkable. And now it must be reinforced, so people know, so that they can make their decision about the future.
Absolutely.
All right, Madam Speaker, thank you so much. We remember January 6th, and we remember your extraordinary leadership on January 6th, even if the predecessor believes it was Nikki Haley who was Speaker of the House. We thank you so much for your service to America and for being with us this morning.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you all. Happy Women's International Women's Day.
All right.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. I know who I'm with. Yes. And in fact, we're going to talk about that now. So thank you so much, Madam Speaker. Maura, I noticed you did not bring plastic fruit or a portable kitchen behind you as you came here this morning. You weren't swept up by the Republican response, I take it. But the entire night, it did seem that again, Republicans were just on the wrong side of the issues, on the wrong side of the polls, on the wrong side of history.
You know, watching that Republican response made my skin crawl, honestly. It was just, at the end, I kind of had to rewind to listen to what she was saying, because all I could kind of hear was, but the kitchen is my favorite place to eat. And, of course, you know, God bless, that's fine. But that should not be the future that's predetermined for every woman in America. And that apparently is what Republicans want to see from women in this country. They want to strip away our rights. They want to be our doctor, our priest, our pastor, our father. No, thank you. Okay, this is 2024, not 1900. I don't know what country she's living in, Katie Britt, but the one that I'm living in is one in which we still have our votes and an equal say in what happens to our bodies. And I think it was a really important thing to watch because it was a chilling reminder of the future that Republicans apparently see for this country.
Yeah.
It was obviously offensive, but also just, I cannot imagine that that is what most Americans want. So in that sense, it was a little bit reassuring. I think, Donnie, that's right. You know, listening to Joe Biden last night, I couldn't help but think he needs to be out talking like this
He really does.
all the time.
He
It
really
can't be a
does.
one shot.
Yeah. With us now, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York. Senator, I've been saying this morning, I've been in a few of these. I don't think I've ever seen any State of the Union in all my time where one party was back on their heels as much as Donald Trump's MAGA party was last night.
You bet. Call me giddy, call me exhilarated. Joe, this speech showed that America is strong and Joe Biden is strong. And you are right. One of the most fascinating scenes for me was the sullenness of the Republicans. They weren't out there yelling and screaming. A few, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene. As long as she's the representative of the Republican Party, impetuous, angry, pro-life, former QAnon supporter, that's fine. Let her be the face of the party. But mainly, the Republicans were sitting there looking at their faces. It was a great moment when he talked about how President Trump had lied about 9/11. And then he looked at them and he said, you know that's true. And they all just looked down. They knew he was right. So first, the vision for the middle class in America. This was a speech that had a whole lot of detail, a whole lot of what I want to do and how I want to get it done. But it also was a speech that showed Joe Biden has that fight in him, that when he talks about the middle class, when he talks about the things he believes in, he has fight, he has strength. We walked out of that speech exhilarated, and this is the Joe Biden Americans are going to see, Joe. I mean, you're right. Now that Trump is the nominee, that's one part of the new phase, but the other is, you know, Joe Biden's a governor, small g. He gets things done together with our Democratic Senate majority. We had the greatest 2 years that we've had in a very long time in terms of production for middle-class people, for American values. But that takes a lot of time and effort. Now he's out there selling what he did, talking about what he wants to do, in much more of a campaign mode. That's just fine. And let me tell you, anyone who sat in that, who listened to that speech, knows that Joe Biden's going to win the election and have a great second term. I am excited.
Well, and Jonathan O'Meara's here. He's got a question.
Oh, I meant January 6th. I said 9/11, but
yeah,
January 6th.
January 6th. You know, Jonathan, it really was fascinating seeing how the Republicans looked down.
Yeah,
I thought Jonathan O'Meara, they were humiliated when he brought up January the 6th because they know. Mike Johnson knows. He got the power based on the lie. So. Again, the Republicans looked so weak last night.
And January 6th, of course, some of the violence happened in that very chamber where, of course, they all gathered there last night. Senator Schumer, thanks for being with us this morning. You know, there were a few points last night where the president really took the fight to Republicans on two in particular, right off the top. One was on Ukraine funding, saying, look, Vladimir Putin's not going to stop with Ukraine. We need to back Kyiv. And then secondly, trying to change the narrative around immigration, which to this point, Republicans, per polling, had gotten the better of him. But now, because Republicans abandoned that bipartisan deal, the White House thinks there's a chance to change that story as well. Do you think what we saw last night could actually lead to some legislative progress, or at least do you feel better about the politics of it?
Much better. We're now on our front foot, frankly, because we Democrats in the Senate, with Joe Biden's help, put together a strong bipartisan proposal. This is hardly some left-wing proposal. It's endorsed by the Wall Street Journal editorial page, the font of right-wing conservatism in America. It's endorsed by the Border Guards Union, which has been extreme and right-wing. It's endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce. And until Donald Trump opened his mouth, it would have had the support of Republicans. And then he gave us a gift. He said, I don't want to do it because I want more chaos at the border, so it'll help me in the election. This is a man in a party who said the border's in crisis, and now we should let it fester for another year so he might have political advantage. America, and it was classic Joe Biden. He had a real solution. He talked about it. He talked about the more border guards. He talked about turning away the fentanyl from the machines that could detect them. He talked about things that we could do, but in a strong way that vibrated with the American people. And just as we saw in the 3rd Congressional District, in where Swazi won, we are now on our front foot on immigration, not our back foot, and that is a major change. And I give my senators and Senator Murphy, Senator Sinema, Senator Langford a whole lot of credit for helping us make that happen.
Yeah, let's talk about the economy. Right now, of course, we just got a new report in, breaking news. Once again, job hiring blew past expectations. The Wall Street Journal reports 275,000 new jobs over the past month. You look at all the numbers, they're historic. The best jobs numbers ever over the past 3 years. The jobless rate below 4% for the first time in 60 years. New business starts up. As the president said, you look at manufacturing up. I'm curious, you've been in politics a long time. How long does it take for the reality to catch up with the expectations?
Great question, Joe. The economy is always a lagging indicator. In other words, it takes about a year for the reality to catch up with people's views, because they still remember when eggs were $4 or $5. They still remember when gasoline was $4 or $5. Now the prices are lower, but people have a view. Let's see if this sticks or this just isn't a bump. Once it stays for a while, which it will, inflation going down from 9% to less than 3%, 15 million new jobs, a record. That's all going to start sinking in. We're already seeing it in some of our Senate races where the Senate candidates or the Senate incumbents are talking about this record, and they're running ahead of their Republican incumbents or their Republican challengers. So it's a lagging indicator, but I believe by September, the economy will be in people's minds far more favorable than it is today. And by the way, and I think Donald Trump will screw it up repeatedly with what he says. I thought it was a great moment when Joe Biden accused the Republicans of wanting tax breaks for the rich when he wanted to see help for the middle class. And again, they were sullen. You'd think that, sometime in the old days, they might get up and cheer when he said, you want tax breaks for the rich. Oh, no, looking down at their seats again. The sullenness of the Republicans was just amazing. And I've been to a whole lot of these speeches. I've never seen them so down in the dumps because they saw the real Joe Biden. They saw what they're up against. And I'm sure many of them talked among themselves and said, gee whiz, we're going to lose this election, but Trump is our leader.
They looked about as sullen and downcast as Red Sox fans like Lemire and myself right now, waiting for another last place finish this year, Senator.
We Yankee fans aren't too much happier, Joe. You know that.
You've got Soto. Come on, baby. It's great. Right. Get your head. We shall see. All right, Senator, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, thank you so much, as always. It's great having you here.
It's a happy day. It's really a happy day. I walked out of that speech exhilarated, and I'm exhilarated still this morning. This is just great stuff for us.
All right. Thanks so much. Let's bring in right now Tim Kaine. It was more than 4 decades ago that the first child was conceived through IVF in the United States and was born. Take a look at this clip before we introduce our guest.
It's a girl. This morning at 7:46 a.m.
With those words, 70-year-old Dr. Howard Jones announced the birth of America's first so-called test tube baby born this morning. She's 5-pound, 12-ounce Elizabeth Jordan Carr, born by cesarean section to 28-year-old Judith Carr, a school teacher in Westminster, Massachusetts.
Elizabeth joins us now, along with Democratic Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, who brought Elizabeth with him as a guest last night. Elizabeth, welcome. Who would ever believe that the miracle of your birth would be such a controversy all these years later when it's given the same hope to other parents that it gave to your family?
I know, hard to believe. 42 years ago, we were having the same debate about this issue that we were as last night.
Senator, talk about this miracle that, you know, again, parents all over America want, that actually right now can't even get protected in the United States Senate.
Joe, it was just an electric night last night, and I happened to be in Birmingham the day that the University of Alabama, Birmingham, the big medical system, announced that they were suspending all IVF procedures in the state, and it was like a lightning storm. It hit the city. People were shocked. And what occurred to me is I think this story sort of started in Virginia. When I got back home, I did the research about Elizabeth being born at Norfolk General Hospital. She had given an interview the day before I was doing the research where she said, for the first time in my life, I feel like an endangered species. What you need to know is there are 12 million Elizabeth Carrs on the planet Earth right now, people who have been born through IVF or other reproductive technologies. They're living their best lives. They're raising families. They're bringing joy to their parents, grandparents, friends, and family, contributing to society. The net good to humanity is overwhelming, but we knew when the Dobbs decision came down that Republicans in states would go after IVF, would go after contraception. That's what's happening, and that's why I've joined with Tammy Duckworth to file a bill, the Building of Families Act, that would protect IVF in every zip code in this country so people can choose to grow their families this way if they want.
Senator, it's Jen Psaki, one of your constituents from Virginia. I wanted to ask you about what you just alluded to, because one of the warning signs that this has, or eye-opening signs that this has all exposed for us, is the fact that when Republicans are going after IVF, they're going after mifepristone, they're going after contraception. It's not just Dobbs. So break down for us what is happening in Congress right now, and what should women, men, people who are concerned about this issue be aware of in terms of the legislation that is still being pushed through Congress by anti-choice members.
Jen, I'm not going to be too much of a legal nerd here, but when we read the Dobbs decision, the rationale wasn't just we're going to overturn Roe versus Wade. The rationale was to challenge 100 years of cases going back into the 19-teens that said if you're a person in the United States, there are some elements of your personal autonomy that are so precious that the long arm of government, especially the criminal law, can't invade it. And the court threw all of that out in the Dobbs decision. And so that's why you see courts going after mifepristone, going after contraception, states going after in vitro fertilization. I have a bipartisan bill with Senators Murkowski, Collins, and Sinema. It's the only bipartisan bill in Congress to restore Roe versus Wade as a statutory right. The president talked about doing that last night, if you can get a Congress that will go with him. And then Tammy Duckworth is leading the bill that I co-sponsor that would make plain anywhere in the country a provider can provide IVF, a patient can access IVF, and an insurer can insure IVF. And we need to do this in Congress so that people aren't left up to the whims of state legislators who often don't even understand the science behind what they're doing.
Elizabeth, Anand Girdharadas here. I question, when I was growing up, Republicans always talked about family values, and it seems like the desire to have children is a pretty baseline family value. I'm curious, if you were to speak to Speaker Mike Johnson, who yesterday said he was grappling with the question of whether IVF is murder, what case would you make about why you deserve the right to exist?
I think my answer to that is just, one that my father said 42 years ago when I was born. He said he really just didn't understand how anyone could have a problem with this technology, because it allowed my mother and father to do the one thing that almost universally is wanted, and that's to build a family. So I really hope that some of the double talk of we support IVF, I really hope that starts to get backed up with pushing forward on this bill.
All right. Elizabeth Carr and Democratic Senator Tim Kaine, thank you both so much. We greatly appreciate it.
For years, I've heard many of my Republican and Democratic friends say that China is on the rise. and America's falling behind. They've got it backwards. I've been saying it for over 4 years, even when I wasn't president. America's rising. We have the best economy in the world. In 1,000 cities and towns, the American people are writing the greatest comeback story never told.
Let's bring in right now the U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for being with us. First, we're just marveling, as we have for about a year now, about this economy that just keeps exceeding expectations. What's your reaction to the jobs report?
Well, I agree with you. We're seeing very strong job growth. A year or so ago, who would have expected that we could be averaging over 250,000 new jobs a month and yet seeing inflation come down? But that's what we see in this morning's report. 275,000 jobs in February, signaling a strong labor market, the longest stretch of unemployment under 4% that we've seen in 50 years, and really no evidence in this month's wage data of an acceleration in wage increases that could create inflationary pressures. Americans are getting ahead. They're getting solid wage increases that exceed inflation, but there's really no evidence of inflationary pressure coming from the labor market, and we just have excellent, strong performance. The U.S. economy is performing better than any advanced nation around the world, and our strength is buoying global growth as well.
Madam Secretary, again, we've asked the question repeatedly over the past year, the source of the strength and the resilience. What insights do you have about how the U.S. economy has outperformed expectations of economists on Wall Street, on Main Street, across the world? What's behind this economic engine that just keeps moving forward?
Well, first of all, we have seen a big increase in labor supply that is enabling strong growth, increased adult participation in the labor market. The policies that the Biden administration put in place during the pandemic serve to ensure that those who lost work would not be permanently scarred as they were after the financial crisis in 2008. We directed enough money to state and local governments that they were able to keep employees on the payroll. We got people, with those programs, we got people back to work quickly, and President Biden has been focused on investing in our economy, putting in place investments in infrastructure, rebuilding bridges and roads across the nation, expanding access to the internet, and investing in industries of the future like semiconductors and clean energy. And the incentives that have been put in place have generated $650 billion of private investment in manufacturing and in clean energy. And we're seeing areas of the country that really haven't seen a lot of opportunity. We've seen great growth on the coasts, but much of the country hasn't seen good jobs created. But that's changed over the last several years, and that surge in private investment is also buoying our recovery.
Secretary Yellen, the tax credit that the White House announced yesterday, the provision for housing, $10,000, do you see any risk that that could overheat the housing market and impact the economy?
Well, the president is also focused on the supply of housing. He wants to make sure that it's affordable, especially for first-time home buyers and Americans who whose families did not have housing and make sure they can afford it. But he's also proposing steps to expand the supply of housing. And I believe they would be very helpful, investing in refurbishment of properties, expanding the low-income housing tax credit that will be helpful to Americans deal with the problems of a shortage of affordable housing.
All right. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, thank you so much for being with us. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.